a small town where everyone knows each other. Here, life flows quietly and measuredly. In the center of this story are Alice and Alexander. They have been married for 10 years and seem like a perfect couple in the eyes of their neighbors. They have a cozy house on the outskirts, a small garden where Alice grows flowers, and an 8-year-old son, Maxime, who is their pride. Alice is a woman with a soft character and a warm voice. She works as a music teacher at a local school where she teaches children to play the piano. She always dreamed of a life filled with art, but over time her life became more about the mundane than the dreams. Although she loves her job, lately she feels stuck in a routine. Alexander is the complete opposite. He is practical, purposeful, and loves his family very much. After several years of working for a large company, he opened his own furniture repair workshop. Business brings stable income, but requires a lot of time. Alexander often comes home tired and does not always find the strength for romance or warm conversations with his wife. Maxime is their inquisitive son. He likes to build model cars and play in the yard with the neighborhood kids, but even he begins to notice that Mom and Dad have become a little distant. One evening, sitting at dinner, the family, as usual, discusses the day. But Alice seems detached. She hardly listens to her son's story about the new toy, and even Alexander's jokes do not make her laugh. Her thoughts are far away. "Are you all right, Alice?" Alexander asks, hiding his concern behind a calm voice. "Yeah, just tired," she replies with a slightly strained smile. This evening, they once again go to bed without saying warm words to each other. Alice looks at the ceiling, thinking that she is missing something important in life. She has no idea that soon her world will change forever. The new week at school started with a surprise. A new teacher, Artem, joined the teaching staff. He is young, charismatic, and immediately attracted the attention of his colleagues. Artyom teaches physical education, but his energy and confidence make him a noticeable figure among the reserved and busy teachers. Alice met him at lunch break. He came to the teaching room and smiled at everyone. His smile was so genuine that even the most reserved colleagues melted. "Hello, I'm Artem. New one here," he said, holding out his hand to Alice. "Alice, I teach music," she answered with a polite smile. Artem immediately started joking and telling stories from his previous place of work. Everyone around laughed, and Alice noticed how easily he found a common language with people. She was interested in his carefreeness, something she had been missing so much in her life lately. In the following days, they met from time to time in the corridors of the school. Artem always joked or gave casual compliments. It was innocent, but Alice found herself beginning to look forward to these chance encounters. One day after class, she stayed in the music class to prepare materials for the next day. There was a knock at the door. It was Artyom. "Greetings. I didn't want to disturb. I just heard the sounds of the piano," he said, entering the classroom. "There is always music playing here. Come in if you want," Alice replied, as she felt her heart begin to beat faster. Artem sat down next to her and began to ask about her work, life, and dreams. They talked for an hour, not even noticing how quickly time flew. At one point, he said, "You know, Alice, you have a very warm voice. You could probably conquer the scenes if you wanted to." This compliment touched her soul. She hadn't heard such words in a long time. Left alone, Alice thought about this conversation for a long time. She tried to convince herself that it was just politeness, but deep down she liked Artem's attention. It was the beginning of something she couldn't quite grasp yet. The next morning, Alice hurried to work. Her thoughts were occupied not only with lessons or preparation for classes, but also with memories of yesterday's conversation with Artem. She didn't admit it to herself, but something in him awakened long-forgotten emotions. She was pleased to feel interesting and wanted. The day passed as usual until after lunch, Artyom offered her to drink coffee after classes. "Just as colleagues," he winked with a characteristic smile. Alice hesitated. She had a family, a son, responsibilities at home. But the idea of spending some time away from home, in the company of a person who brought lightness to her life, seemed tempting. "Good, but only for a little while," she replied, more to herself than to him. That evening she came home later than usual. Alexander was sitting in the living room, working on a laptop, and Maxim was watching cartoons. "Something late?" the man asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Yes, I had to help the students prepare for the concert," Alice answered quickly, trying to look calm. It was her first lie. Small, but it left behind a strange feeling of anxiety. Alice hurried to the kitchen to avoid unnecessary questions. Meanwhile, Maxim approached his mother and hugged her. "Mom, you rarely play with me now," he said. Alice felt guilty. She realized that she had focused on her own emotions and distanced herself from her family. In the evening, when everyone was already asleep, Alice lay in bed for a long time looking at the ceiling. She asked herself what was going on. Isn't that going too far? She wanted to justify herself, to say that it was just a conversation, just a coffee meeting. But deep down, she knew she was doing something wrong. This lie was a small step towards a change that could destroy everything she had built over the years. But at that time, Alice did not yet realize how difficult this path would be. Weeks passed. Artem found any excuse to talk to Elisa. His jokes, compliments, and casual manner of communication became more and more attractive to her. Alice tried to keep her distance at first, but her resistance melted with each encounter. It seemed to her that Artem understood her better than anyone else. One day, when there were no classes at school due to preparations for a holiday concert, Artem suggested we go for coffee together to a new cafe that had recently opened in the city center. "It's just coffee, Alice. It's okay," he said with the same playful smile. Alice knew that this was already crossing the line, but her heart was asking for the adventure that had been so lacking lately. She agreed. The cafe was cozy, with soft lighting and light jazz playing in the background. Artem chose a table in the corner, away from prying eyes. They talked for hours, and Alice felt something inside her change. His attention, his interest in her thoughts and feelings made her feel special. At some point, Artem took her hand. Alice held her breath but did not withdraw. "Elisa, you are beautiful, and you deserve to be happy," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. These were the words she had wanted to hear for so long. Her heart was beating faster, and her mind was screaming to stop, but she couldn't. That night, for the first time, they crossed a line that could not be crossed. Their coffee ended with a kiss that felt both wrong and the kind that brought her back to life. Returning home, Alice felt mixed emotions. Both excitement and guilt overwhelmed her. She imagined the face of Alexander, who did not suspect anything, and thought of Maxim, who was waiting for her at home. But at the same time, she had a burning feeling that she had done something for herself for the first time in many years. That evening, she told Alexander that she was tired and went to bed early, but it was impossible to fall asleep. Her heart was torn between two worlds, the world of her family and the world that gave her the emotions she had been looking for so long. That first kiss was the beginning of something that would change her life forever. Alexander was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, reviewing documents for work. Over the past few weeks, he had noticed that Alice had become different. Her attention to family affairs disappeared. She was more often late for work, and her phone was always at hand. Today, like yesterday, Alice came home late, explaining that she was preparing the students for the concert. Her smile seemed strained, and her eyes avoided meeting his gaze. Alexander, although he tried not to jump to conclusions, began to feel that something was wrong. The next morning, when Alice left her phone on the kitchen table, Alexander noticed the screen light up with a new message. He wasn't going to read it, but the sender's name, Artem, caught his attention. The message was short. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. You are incredible." At that moment, Alexander felt the ground go away from under his feet. He put the phone back, pretended nothing happened, and tried to stay calm. But his heart was constricted by suspicions. Who is Artem? What does great evening mean? And why does his wife receive such messages? Alexander could not concentrate on work all day. He constantly returned to what he saw and tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it's just a colleague. Maybe the message doesn't mean anything. But his intuition suggested that it was something more. That evening, he decided to talk to Alice. At dinner, he tried to start a conversation. "Elisa, you've been late at work a lot lately. Are you okay?" Alice, feeling tense, answered almost automatically. "Yeah, just a lot of work before the concert." Her answer sounded convincing, but Alexander noticed how she lowered her eyes. This was another detail that confirmed his suspicions. After dinner, Alexander stayed alone in the kitchen. He sat in silence for a long time, trying to decide what to do next. Confront directly? Wait for confirmation? It was hard for him to believe that the woman he loved could be hiding something from him. But his intuition had already begun to paint a gloomy picture. That night he decided to watch and wait. He needed the truth, even if it was painful. A week passed, and the tension in Alexander and Elisa's house grew. They talked only about everyday things, household chores, maxims, lessons, work plans. But behind every word there was an understatement. Alexander was still watching Elisa, and she felt his detachment. One evening, when Maxim went to bed, Alexander decided to talk frankly. Alice was putting things in her bag for the next day when the man entered the room. "We need to talk," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. Alice froze for a moment, then turned to him. "What happened?" Alexander came closer. His gaze was serious, almost piercing. "You have changed, Elisa. You became different. You are constantly delayed. You look aloof. What's going on?" Alice inhaled and looked down, trying to hide her excitement. "I'm just tired, Sasha. Work takes a lot of energy, and I guess I stopped hiding it, that's all," she replied, but her voice sounded uncertain. "Tired?" Alexander asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "Then explain this to me." He pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot of a message from Artem that he had saved after seeing him last week. Alice felt a cold wave of fear pass through her body. She tried to remain calm, but her voice betrayed her. "This is just a colleague. We talked about the concert. You yourself know how much I work." Alexander shook his head. "No need, Alice. I'm not blind. Who is this Artem, and why does he write such things to you?" There was silence between them. Alice tried to find the right words, but she felt that every excuse she made would sound like a lie. Finally, she answered sharply. "Maybe I'm really tired not only of work, but of everything. From this routine, from the fact that you don't notice me. When was the last time you asked how I was? When was the last time you just hugged me?" Alexander was stunned by her words. He took a step back, trying to figure out if it was just an emotional outburst or something more. "I thought we were happy, Alice. Yes, I work a lot, but I do it for us, for Maxim. I always tried to make your life better, but if you feel that way, why didn't you tell me earlier?" Alice was silent, looking at the floor. She didn't know how to explain everything she had been feeling for the past months. She wanted to escape from this look, from this conversation that was tearing her apart. Alexander, realizing that he would not get the truth that night, turned and left the room. His heart was broken, but he knew this was just the beginning. Alice was left alone with her pain and guilt, realizing that their marriage was on the brink. The next day, Alexander decided to act. His anxiety and suspicions did not give him peace. He felt that he had to find confirmation of his guesses, even if it was painful. He decided to follow Alice to find out what was really going on. In the evening, Alice again said that she was late at work because of a concert rehearsal. Alexander nodded silently, hiding that this time he would go after her. As soon as she left the house, he waited a few minutes, took the car keys, and quietly followed. Alice went to school, as she said, but after some time, Alexander saw her leave the building and head in the other direction, clearly not towards the concert hall. She got into the car, and Alexander continued to follow her. Her path led to a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Alexander parked nearby and watched as Alice went inside. A few minutes later, he saw a young man, Artyom, approach the cafe. He was friendly, smiling, and looked completely at ease. They embraced, and it lasted longer than a normal greeting would have required. Inside the cafe, Alexander saw Elisa and Artem sitting at a table, laughing, talking, and sometimes looking at each other as if there was no one around. He felt his heart clench in pain and his hands fill with rage. He wanted to go inside and put everything back in place, but he knew that would only make things more difficult. Alexander took a photo through the glass to have evidence. Returning to the car, he sat for a long time, staring into the void. His mind could not accept that the wife he loved more than anything could do this to him. He felt betrayal, anger, and pain at the same time. When Alice returned home, her face glowed with pleasure, which she had not felt recently in communication with her husband. She did not notice that Alexander was sitting in the living room in the dark, waiting for her. He didn't say anything that evening, but decided that tomorrow they would have a serious talk. Alexander was ready to put her in front of the facts. He needed the truth. and this time he wasn't going to let it slip away. The next day, Artem was sitting in his office at school, carelessly looking at his phone. His attention was drawn to a message from another woman, one of his former passions, who was persistently trying to reconnect. He smiled as he read her words, but quickly put the phone aside. For him, it was just a game, an innocent pastime that brought him pleasure. Artem never took his intrigues seriously. He was confident in his charisma and easily charmed people. His relationship with Alice was no exception. She seemed interesting to him, even special, but only because he saw something more in her eyes, a desire to break out of the routine that he himself hated in his life. But he did not understand, or did not want to understand, that for Alice it was more than just entertainment. The same day, after lessons, Elisa came to Artem in his office. She looked a little tense, but tried to keep calm. "Artem, we need to talk," she said, sitting down across from him. Artem immediately felt the seriousness of her mood. He leaned forward and looked into her eyes. "What happened, Alice?" She paused before answering. "I don't know if what we are doing is right. I'm not sure that's what I really want." Artem smiled with his usual relaxed smile, which always relieved tense moments. "Alice, you think too much. We just have a good time together. Life is short. You deserve to be happy." But this time it did not reassure her. She expected to hear something more, something sincere. Instead, his light-hearted approach only deepened her doubts. "And what's next, Artem? What does that mean to you?" she asked. Her voice sounded insistent. Artem shrugged his shoulders. "I don't like to ask such questions, Elisa. We are just enjoying the moment. Is it that bad?" These words hit her like a cold shower. She understood that for him it was all just a game, something without meaning. Her heart sank in pain because she had invested so much more in this relationship. She thought she had found someone who understood her, but now that illusion began to crumble. Alice stood up. Her eyes became cold, her voice restrained. "I don't know if I can continue this, Artem. I think I need to rethink everything." Artem tried to calm her again, but this time she was adamant. Her thoughts were filled with guilt and shame before her family. Her life was falling apart, and she suddenly realized that the person she had risked it all for was never worth it. Leaving school, Alice wondered for the first time if she could go back to the way things were. But will it not be too late? Returning home, Alice felt her thoughts swirling in a vortex of contradictions. She needed to decide what to do next, but the decision was difficult. She knew that her relationship with Artyom was destroying her family, and at the same time, she was afraid to confess everything to Alexander. That evening, when she crossed the threshold of the house, she was greeted by silence. Maxim was playing in his room, and Alexander was sitting in the living room, carefully going through some papers. His demeanor was reserved, but Alice sensed that something had changed. After dinner, when Maxim went to bed, Alexander suddenly said, "Alice, let's talk." She froze, but managed to hide her excitement. "About what exactly?" she asked, trying to sound calm. Alexander looked at her with a mixture of weariness and determination. "I know something is happening, and I know that it concerns you and Artem. You don't have to deny it. I saw everything." Alice felt her legs buckle. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know how to justify herself. In the end, she decided not to lie. "Yes, Sasha, it's true," she said quietly. His eyes flashed with pain, but he restrained himself from an emotional outburst. "I want to understand. Why? What went wrong? We were happy." Alice lowered her head, trying to collect her thoughts. "I thought you didn't notice me anymore, that I became just a part of the routine. I was looking for something different, something to give me back my sense of life." Her voice broke and she couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Alexander listened carefully to her, but his pain was obvious. He took a deep breath to calm himself before answering. "I understand that maybe I missed something, but does that justify what you did? We have a family. Did you think about Maxim? About us?" These words hit her the hardest. She realized that by her actions she risks losing everything that was once most precious to her. She was scared. Alexander continued, "I don't want to make a decision right away, but if you want to make things right, you'll have to break up with him. Forever. And if you're really willing to work on our relationship, I'm willing to try to give you a second chance." This unexpected step on his part caught her by surprise. She expected anger, ultimatums, even a breakup. But instead, she got a chance. a chance she wasn't sure she deserved. Alice nodded slowly. I will stop everything with Artem, and I want to try to get our family back, she said, trying to find strength in her words. Alexander silently nodded and left the room, leaving her alone. This conversation was only the beginning of a long journey where they both had to find out if it was possible to rebuild what had been destroyed. After talking with Alexander, Alice felt relief, but it was short-lived. The realization of how far her mistakes had gone swept over her like a wave. At night, left alone with her thoughts, she could not sleep. She was tormented by feelings of guilt, shame, and fear of what lay ahead. The next morning, Alice decided to fulfill her promise, to break off relations with Artyom. She waited for the lessons to end and found him in the physical education room. Artem, seeing her, smiled as usual. Hello, beautiful. What brought you to me today? His light-hearted tone made her heart sink even harder. She couldn't look at him the way she used to. Instead of excitement, she felt emptiness. Artem, I came to say, this is the end. We can't date anymore. Her voice shook, but the words were clear. Artem's smile disappeared. He frowned, seeming to take her words seriously for the first time. What do you mean? Are you serious? Alice took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Yes, seriously, it was a mistake. I can't do this anymore. I have to keep my family. Artem looked at her in silence for a few seconds, then nodded with a mixture of surprise and resentment. Well, I didn't expect this. But if that's your choice, that's fine. Just remember, you wanted it too. These words left a bitter aftertaste. She felt the end of one phase of her life, stormy but full of mistakes. She turned and left the office without even looking back. That evening at home, Alice tried to return to normal life, but it was difficult. Her emotions ran high, and at one point she just burst into tears in the kitchen. Maxim, who came to get water, found her. Mom, what happened? Why are you crying? He asked, worried. Alice quickly wiped her tears and hugged her son. Everything is fine, Maxim. It's just that Mom is a little tired, she answered, trying to hold back tears. These words were only half true. Her fatigue was not physical but emotional. She felt every step she took was now accompanied by a burden of guilt. At night, when Maxim fell asleep, Alexander approached Alisa. He saw her teary eyes but did not ask. He just sat down next to him and said, This is just the beginning. It will be difficult for us, but we can do it if we are honest with each other. These words gave Alice a small but important hope. For the first time, she felt that there might still be a chance to save their family. But she also understood that it would be a long and thorny road. A week has passed since Alisa ended her relationship with Artyom. She avoided him at school, trying to focus on her work and family. But Artem is not used to losing. He had always felt in control of the situation, and losing Alice's attention hurt his ego. One day during the lunch break, Artem saw Alisa in the teaching room. She was sitting talking to a colleague when he entered. His presence felt like tension in the air. Artem approached her and, ignoring the others, said, Alisa, we need to talk, alone. Her heart sank. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but she didn't want to make a scene. I'm busy right now, she replied calmly, trying to maintain a professional air. Artem, however, did not stop. He leaned closer and whispered, You didn't think you could disappear from my life so easily, did you? These words made her feel a chill down her spine. She understood that Artem was not going to let her go so easily. That same evening, when Alisa was leaving school, Artem was waiting for her at the entrance. Listen, Alice, we both know you still think about me. Why are you deceiving yourself? He said, trying to play the role of the charming hero again. Alice stopped and looked into his eyes. Her voice was as firm as ever. Artem, it was all a mistake, and I have already made my choice. Respect that. His smile disappeared. He felt that he had lost control. Good. But remember that you destroyed not only your marriage. You also destroyed what was between us, he said with a hint of resentment. After that, Artyom began to avoid her, but Alisa noticed how his behavior changed. He became ruder with colleagues, openly flirted with other female teachers, even tried to tell jokes about their relationship. His frivolity and desire for attention began to destroy his reputation. A few days later, the school principal summoned Artem for a conversation after complaints from colleagues. Rumors about his inappropriate behavior quickly began to spread in the school environment. Artyom began to lose his charisma and influence, which had previously given him confidence. Alice watched this with a mixture of guilt and relief. She understood that Artem was not the person she imagined him to be. His payback came naturally, and all she had to do was try to pick up the pieces of her life. This situation became a lesson for her. In the search for herself, she made many mistakes, but now she was ready to correct them and move on without looking back. Alice was returning home after a hard day. She managed to avoid Artem and the conversations that seemed inevitable until recently. She made an important decision for herself, to work on her marriage. But every step along the way felt like a struggle. That evening, when Alexander returned from work, Elisa gathered her thoughts and decided to take the first serious step. She made dinner, something she hadn't done in a long time, and called him to the table. Their son Maxim was already in his room, so they were left alone. "Sasha, I want to talk to you," she said, putting her fork down. Alexander looked at her carefully. He was ready for another wave of pain, but he didn't expect what he heard. "I stopped all contact with Artem. Forever," she said firmly. "I know I broke your trust, and I'm not apologizing right now, but I want you to know. I am ready to work on our relationship, ready to fight for us." Alexander was silent. He knew those words cost her a lot of effort, but it wasn't enough for him. "This is just the beginning, Alice. Do you think that saying this means fixing everything? No. I have to learn to trust you again. And I don't know if I can do it," he answered calmly but firmly. Alice understood that this path would be long. She felt her eyes fill with tears, but she held herself back. "I know, Sasha. I don't expect you to forgive me in one day. I just want to try it, and I'm ready to do everything so that you can trust me again." The next few days were a test for both of them. Alice tried to return to family life, the warmth and communication that was so lacking before. She began to spend more time with Maxim, did lessons together, walked with him in the park. The boy was happy for his mother's attention, but although he did not understand what had happened, he intuitively felt the tension between his parents. Alexander, for his part, watched Alice. He noticed her efforts, but he could not shake the bitterness. There was still pain in his heart, and every time he looked at her, the memories of the betrayal came flooding back. However, he decided to give her a chance. One evening, when Maxim fell asleep, Alexander sat next to Elisa on the couch. "We can try, Alice, but I want you to know it won't be easy. I need time," he said, holding her hand. Alice nodded, holding back tears. "I'm ready to wait, Sasha. I am ready to prove to you every day that our family is the most important thing for me." They sat next to each other in silence, each lost in his thoughts. It was a tiny step forward, but it gave them hope that the broken pieces could be put back together if both were willing to work at it. Several months have passed. Alice and Alexander were still dealing with the effects of the crisis in their relationship, but both were ready to move forward. They started going to a family psychologist, where they learned to talk openly about their feelings and needs. It was not easy, but each session brought them closer to each other. Alice worked on herself, trying to find a balance between family, work, and personal happiness. She enrolled in painting courses, something she had dreamed of for a long time, but had always put off. Drawing became her way to express emotions that had been accumulating inside for a long time. Alexander noticed these changes and for the first time in a long time saw in her the woman he once loved. Alexander, in turn, also changed. He began to spend more time at home, play with Maxim more often, and listen to his wife's needs. He realized that his work shouldn't come first and took steps to delegate some of the responsibilities in his business. He wanted to restore intimacy in their marriage, but it took time. One evening, when the family was sitting together in the kitchen, Maxim enthusiastically talked about his success at school. Alice and Alexander exchanged warm glances. It was the moment when they felt that the family was becoming strong again. After Maxim went to sleep, Alexander suddenly said, "Alice, I see how you are trying, and I appreciate that. I know it wasn't easy, but I think we can put the past behind us." Alice smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Sasha. I will do everything so that you never doubt me again." They hugged, for the first time in a long time, for real. At that moment, both realized that their marriage had not only taken a hit, but had also become stronger. The next day, they went for a walk to the park as a family. It was a simple day without special events, but for them it became a symbol of a new beginning. They realized that love is not only about feelings, but also about the willingness to work on the relationship, even when it seems that all is lost. The road to restoring trust was long, but they found the strength to continue. Their marriage, though it had changed, was once again a place where everyone felt needed and loved.